Kia ora everyone, and welcome to another webinar hosted by Aotearoa Christians for Peace in Palestine. Really, stoked to have you guys join us this evening for this conversation with Daniel Munayer about decolonising, reconciliation, and peace building. Daniel is a Palestinian Christian from Jerusalem and from Lydda, and he can explain some of that context shortly. But he heads up Musalaha, which is a peace and reconciliation organization in the Holy Land, and is a wonderful communicator and theologian, and just a wonderful person who I'm privileged to call a friend as well. So, Daniel, really, really pleased to have you here this evening. For those who are wondering, the layout will be Daniel's going to share with us for a bit, and then we will have some Q&A to follow. So, if you have any questions as he's going through, just write them down in the chat below, and we'll answer those when we get to there. But yeah, before we kick off, I just want to acknowledge, as we speak about settler colonialism in Palestine, the parallels here in this land, in Aotearoa, or whatever land you're joining from. Unfortunately, there are very parallel themes and patterns in many places. So just want to acknowledge that as well. And we'll begin just with a quick prayer. God, thank you that we can gather. Thank you for Daniel and the important work that he's doing. And God, be in this space, bless the words from our mouths, and may the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen. Daniel. Oh, I need to unmute you. This is a classic. Where have you gone? How do I unmute you? I did this to your brothers on our previous webinar as well. There you are.
Okay. Everybody, you can hear me? Okay, great. I know for you it's good evening or good night, but over here it's good morning. I'm happy to be with you all, and I'll share just a little bit about family background, a bit about the context, and about the reconciliation peace building field here, and sort of some of the tensions and how do we wrestle with reconciliation, and how do we also wrestle with love of enemy. So those are some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. Also, some of the things that I'm going to be covering, I'll spend some time, and then some other things that I'll be talking about, I'm going to more skim, but we can always come back to that in the Q&A. The goal is to have more Q&A time. So on that note, I'm going to share my screen. And some of the things today that we're going to be talking about: settler colonialism, problematizing the peacemaking field, a theology of reconciliation and co-resistance, our model. So I don't want this only to be a academic or theological conversation, but how do we live out our theology? And by that, anybody who has a faith and is living it out is a theologian. And what is the tension between also liberation and reconciliation in our context over here? So quickly, my family history and background is that we're Palestinian Christians, and we have been Palestinian Christians for many years. We can record at least 800 years that we have been Christians here in the land. In Lydda, where my family's from, these are pictures of my grandparents and their brothers and sisters, pre and post 1948. And when I sometimes meet Christians who are from different places in the world, they assume that we converted from Islam or anything like that, but I always try to flex and say we have been Christians longer than your country has existed. So no, it doesn't make a difference. Everybody has to own their own faith, of course, but it's just to put things a little bit into perspective. And we built my ancestors built the church of St. George in Lydda. They're one of the families that contributed to building this church. And this is my brother and my two nephews, and this is also where the relics of St. George are currently present. and Cole, of course, went and visited when he was spending time here. Nakba, I'm going to assume that everybody here is more or less on the same page, but Nakba is when the Palestinians got ethnically cleansed from historic Palestine, and we're talking about 75% of the Palestinians, more or less, that got forcibly displaced, expelled from their homes, and my families and other families were some of the families that managed to stay. Some interesting facts that people sometimes don't know is that in the Nakba, 150 churches were closed in that period of time. We're talking about a population of 18% Christian that got drastically reduced to 1 or 2%. So we're talking about a disaster, not just for the Palestinian Muslim population, also equally for the Palestinian Christian population. This is my great uncle Jack. That is my grandmother's brother, and he was held as hostage. And you can see the Greek Orthodox priest coming to pray for him on the other side of the barbed wire for the other Christians. I don't spend here too much time. I just wanted to say that this is a narrative that is often not always understood and known even by people who are sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause. So we're talking about that my family and my existence is suffering the consequences of what we are calling settler colonial project. And settler colonialism is a type of colonialism that usually European people go to a new land to permanently build a new Europe. And obviously, in the context that we're in, we understand Israel as a settler colonial project. I would also define New Zealand as a settler colonial project, Australia, United States, Canada, South Africa, we can go on. There are many different projects that take different shapes and forms. But the primary difference between maybe colonialism, as we saw Great Britain go and colonize India and extract resources and exploit the native population for cheap labor, slavery, and wars, settler colonialism is primarily concerned with land because the new settlers need land, need space in order to build their new project, their new Europe that they're building. And the second thing is that the native population, the relationship takes a different turn. It's not that now we're just taking advantage of the let's say Indian population by Great Britain, but now the native population has become an obstacle to the narrative, to the project, to the paradigm of the settler colonial project. So settler colonialism and that's, I don't want to spend here too much time, but if we have questions later, we can. But that's the crux of it. It's how you treat and understand native and your relationship to land is the primary thing. And those who tell me, but Daniel, the Israeli Jews, or the Jews before they were Israeli, that were moving to historic Palestine were fleeing refugees from catastrophes in Europe. And I'm not here to undermine the suffering and catastrophe that Jewish people have suffered in Europe and other places around the world, by no means. But this doesn't negate necessarily the other. It's that it's this and that usually hurt and traumatized people tend to hurt and traumatize others if there's no healing and if there's no constructive process that the people and the individuals go through. We talked about this. Logic of elimination is just that I'd like us to think of not just elimination in terms of genocide, like what we've been seeing in Gaza, but to eliminate the native population could also mean forced assimilation, where people are forced to speak English or are forced to not practice their music, dance, religion, and we can see that is also consistent across settler colonial projects. So conflict is and violence is inevitable as the settler population expand and want to take more land. And it's a conquering project. The native population is connected to the land. It is an indigenous one that the land provides its identity, livelihood, and it's a source of life. And there's the disconnect as the settlers are going to take the land, the natives are going to fight for the land, and violence is inevitable in all of the settler colonial context. Excuse me. So insecurity is a characteristic of settler colonial projects. I won't spend here too much time. If people want a concrete example, please look up the nation state law in 2018, which sort of, in many ways, cemented or made it more visible that it said that the right for self-determination is only for one group of people that lives here, not for the other, meaning the Jewish people, not the Palestinian. And this is what politicians have said about the law, that they're willing to sacrifice human rights in order to preserve the Jewish character of the state, etc. Inequality is always a characteristic of settler colonialism. The settlers, in order to maintain their dominance, need military and resource dominance. And that is usually achieved through technology and other means. So you can see that there's a big material inequality between the settler population and the indigenous population. We're going to keep this, but ultimately, what I want us to think of is what are the narratives that the settler community need to create and to establish and to internalize in order to justify in essence, expelling, exterminating, or delegitimizing the native population and their connection to the land. And there's always been an appeal to the settlers' racial and religious superiority. In some contexts, there's also this idea that we are returning to our conquered land. We see this more here in this context in Israel, Palestine, and we also see that in the United States as well, for example, where the Scandinavian settlers in North United States said we're coming back because the Vikings were here before the Native Americans. So there's these stories and narratives, and also the goal is to delegitimize the native claim to the land. So we didn't necessarily own the land in the capitalistic sense of because indigenous people were not capitalistic. Capitalism came with colonialism, and this is an important, like we can say, distinguishment between them as well. So I'm going to just fast forward, but if we have questions about this, I'm happy to come back to this later. But what I want us to first understand is that we are operating, we are doing reconciliation and peace in a context that is dealing with a European and not only, but European Jews and later many other Jews that have come here with a lot of trauma, with a lot of pain, with a lot of, I would say, unprocessed healing, and in return that has been inflicted on the Palestinians who are living here. It's a settler colonial project in which you have the white European settler coming to build a new home, a new land where indigenous people already live, and this creates a lot of violence, tension, and many things that we say today on the news. We can get into that more, but I'd like us to say, okay, well, how is then peace and reconciliation framed within this context? How do people even understand the word reconciliation and peace? So I'm making the argument today that most peace and reconciliation is a colonized term in our context over here. Most of the peace organizations are funded by colonizing powers. There's a recent fund that just started by 4 countries. I think it's Australia, UK, Canada, and another one. who have said they're willing to give 4 million US dollars for peacemaking field, for peace work. Well, for us over here, everybody was sending me the link. Daniel, there's funding, apply. And for me, I said I refuse to apply to this funding. Musalaha, the reconciliation organization I'm here going to share with you today, in which I'm a part of, we find it problematic that we are applying to funding for peace from the same political powers who have been complicit in genocide. It was the UK who largely helped Israel with surveillance, that provided military aid, that enabled what we saw in Gaza to happen. So how can we now apply for money for peace work? Obviously, the proposals that people have to apply for, the organizations, we have to adopt their foreign policy, which means that the intervention, the activities that we will have, the output, outcomes, and ultimately the impact, the theory of change is going to be limited. The scope of the language of the proposal of the peace work is going to be limited to the understanding of Western government powers. And for us, this is a big problem, and we don't accept it as a Palestinian-founded and led reconciliation organization. Also, research conducted by Amal Tikva, it's an organization, a peace organization, so sort of it desires to provide the big picture, does research on the field, found that out of the 52 organizations, only 18% were solely led by Palestinians. So we're looking at a field, a peace building field that is funded by powers that are complicit in genocide, and I would even say just colonialism. And secondly, the field itself is dominated and is to an extent controlled by Israeli Jews. The Palestinians, in many senses, don't get to articulate and to explain what peace or reconciliation could even look to them or what it means to them. So, 1 second. In addition to that, the civil administration, which is the body, the army institution responsible for affairs in the West Bank. So it says civil administration, but it's an army body. It says that Palestinians under the age of 27 who are single are not allowed to enter into Israel proper in order to participate in peace activities. So we're seeing that also there is an attempt to separate, to make it more difficult, to provide extra obstacles. And we used to have summer camps where we would take Palestinian children from the West Bank into Israel, where we'd have a big summer camp with about 150 children. And that has had to stop since 2023 because it is now very difficult to move people cross-border. So I would like to share with you today that for Palestinians, and I would say for many other indigenous, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but from what I hear, and many other indigenous populations across the world, reconciliation and peacemaking are dirty words. At best, people are skeptic and mistrust peace work. They say, oh, you're just wanting to normalize, to make normal injustice, to normalize suffering. And at worst, they see peacemaking as a colonial tool that's going to pacify and make Palestinians, less, in a way, active or maybe angry about the injustice that is being faced here on a daily basis. But as a Christian, we are confronted with these teachings that are given to us by Jesus and also by Paul in his epistles. But even if you're a non-Christian and you're listening today, I think it's just we're talking about being human over here. We're talking about how do we actually engage in a healthy and humane way with each other. And in the Christian language, it's how do you love one's neighbor? How do you love your enemy? And I understand that we have a mandate as Christians to be reconcilers, not only peacemakers in the sense of the field itself, but reconciliation as the the ministry, the global work of participating in what God is already doing, which is reconciling the whole world back to God's self. So another thing that I always like to share is, what is really a difference between the Christian faith and other faiths? And for me, it is that there is the commandment for us to love our enemies. And I think that's such a radical and extreme commandment that often we maybe overlook it. But here we're trying to understand, how do we even do this? Love of enemy, I want to say, shouldn't be just that we accept and submit to our enemies' terms of power, or their understandings of peace and reconciliation, or their terms, but love of enemy should be grounded in knowing our self-worth as people made in God's image, as humans, as children of God, and also that Christian theology must extend beyond personal salvation. Good Christian theology has to be also a source of blessing to one's enemy and neighbor. That's when your theology is a blessing to your enemy, that's where you can really see transformation starting to take place, when it opens and sees others. So the question remains: how do we do it in this context? And I'm going to show you two biblical examples before I get into the work we're doing here. But I'd like you to think of that we are thinking of reconciliation not as how do we continue to just dialogue, how do we continue to bring people together just to talk. Actually, bringing people together just to talk can be very abusive to the weaker side. When it doesn't recognize the imbalance of power, it often takes advantage and it misuses the presence and the grace that the weaker side gives by even showing up. So we believe that reconciliation needs to be articulated and explained by the weaker group, not necessarily by the powerful group, because the powerful group is going to be blind to their privilege. It's going to be blind to the daily realities that people have to face that are coming from weaker situations, vulnerable, etc. So, for example, if I now bring Palestinians and Israelis together and we say, let's go and meet and talk, and then what happens is that we meet and we talk, and the end result is that everybody goes back home and we continue our life as we did before. That is what I would call normalization and abuse of power and a colonized approach to peace. The peace work in its essence, reconciliation in its essence, needs to be articulated when there is oppression, that freedom has to be a core component of the reconciliation process or an end goal in which we are striving for. I hope I'm making sense for you guys. So what I'm trying to say is that we're moving away from the terms coexistence, and we are now talking about co-resistance, because it's nice to talk about peace and reconciliation, but we are talking about peace and reconciliation in a context of settler colonialism, and one of the expressions of settler colonialism has been genocide, but it's not only genocide. But we're talking about mass extermination, extreme oppression, lack of basic human needs over a long period of time that is brewing. It's the ingredients for further violence and escalation in terms of just destruction and death. So when we're talking about peace and reconciliation, we have to, in order for it to be relevant or authentic, it has to face these realities that we are living in. It cannot be something that we ignore and we do in a classroom. It has to be something that it has to be relevant and mean something for people in their lives. So we are coexistence is something that can be very triggering to Palestinians because it's like, okay, so coexistence, but a horse and a horse rider both coexist. One eats, at the table, one eats the hay in the barn. It's not necessarily how you would understand reconciliation between humans. So we are looking at nonviolent co-resistance. How do people from different backgrounds, from different identities, how do they come together and non-violently co-resist injustice? How do people work together to imagine and articulate a new model of humanity, a new way of living that isn't necessarily this paradigm of settler and native? Because the settler colonialism is helpful for us understanding the history, and it's helpful for us for understanding what's going on and making sense of what's going around us, but it doesn't necessarily offer us constructive ways forward. And this is where I'm arguing that reconciliation does provide a constructive way forward. Of course, it's the end goal of restoring all broken relationships so that we are all living in harmony with one another and we're treating each other correctly. That's how I imagine, the fullness of heaven, the kingdom of God, and we're all able to eat, talk, and sing together and be in harmony. But in the meantime, we're living in this reality where we're not. So how do we actually continue to fulfill the mandate and I would say the Christian vocation that we are given? So one of the ways, I'm not saying this is the only way, but one of the ways is through what we're calling nonviolent co-resistance. We see in Exodus chapter 2 a powerful example of a network of women that co-resisted Pharaoh's commandment to genocide. He said, kill all the Hebrew babies, boy babies, and you saw a group of midwives that basically saved Moses' life, and the Egyptian princess who put her life at risk and really saved Moses' life and even returned Moses to his biological mother for nurturing. And in addition to that, it's not like Pharaoh's daughter did a one-time act, but Pharaoh's wife, it says, was also financially aiding the Hebrew resistance movement, the slave movement in Egypt. So it's more than just she just saved Moses. She was, really going against empire, and that she could be very easily accused of treason by this form of co-resistance. So, I just for the sake of time, I won't go into too much of the whole process. But what I like in the story of Exodus is that liberation is articulated by the Hebrews, but then the Egyptians and others start to recognize and start to join and follow. And it says that when they left the land of Egypt, that other groups joined and followed the Hebrews. So it wasn't an exclusive movement that was defined also by ethnic religious identity, but it was a movement that believed in everybody's right to freedom and to shake off the shackles of empire. Another example is this is maybe more intra Palestinian reconciliation, more relevant between Palestinian Christians and Muslims, perhaps, or between different factions of Palestinians. But you had Jesus who brought together a tax collector and a zealot. And for me, I've always imagined this as a very awkward and interesting, weird dynamic where Simon the Zealot, we can assume, was actively involved in a violent resistance to Roman occupation. And then Matthew the tax collector was benefiting from the occupation of his people and was exploiting them as a tax collector. And when Jesus was building his team, what was he asking of each person to sacrifice and to reclaim? as they were joining his team. And obviously, what was required of Simon is going to be different than what is required of Matthew. But this we can see is really relevant. And, the techniques that the Zealots had 2,000 years ago was, hostage taking and assassinations. And it was their understanding of resistance to the Roman occupation. So you can see that there are certain similarities, even though we are 2,000 years later, there are certain things about humans that remain. And what I'm trying to say here is that in the team that Jesus was building, he was explaining that the new family of God is a family in which there's no room for oppression. And that Matthew was a sub-oppressor, we can say, but in some regards, so is Simon. So some basic questions that we ask ourselves in the Musalaha office, what does reconciliation mean in Palestine, Israel? How do we reconcile the settler to the native? And how do you reconcile to people who think that they're superior to you while living in a system that oppresses you? These are the questions, and I'm not here to say that we have it all put together, but we are constantly wrestling with these, what these words mean. How do we live them out? And yeah, it's not an attempt to say this is what we got all right, but we definitely know what doesn't work based on our failures. And I think that's the approach that we've been taking over the years. We have our model of reconciliation. It's our six-stage model. And I'll quickly explain that in the six-stage model, you begin with developing relationships. And the first thing that we do is we go to the desert. So this is a group that I had the privilege to facilitate or co-facilitate with others. You can see me on the right with the green. But this is a group of people that went to the desert and said, okay, we are committing to reconciliation, to restoring relationship. But the starting point of all of these people, all of these individuals, was that everybody is against the occupation. If any of you were wondering, where can you start? And the argument that I always get is, but if your starting point is that everybody's against occupation, you're going to exclude a large group of people that don't view it that way, and they need to be reached as well. It's true, but I think that many times we constantly try to think of how do we appeal and please the powerful group, and how do we not exclude them? But I think that we need to reverse the question. What is an acceptable and non-abusive starting point for Palestinians that just went through mass killings? So I think that's a starting point that is not often asked. It's not always what you say; it's also what you don't say in these type of contexts that really matters. So we started in the desert. We went out. We were a group of, I think, 21 people, and we go out into the desert and we learn to listen to the desert, and then we learn to listen to one another. And the goal here is also to indigenize the reconciliation process and to connect to the land, to nature, and to our natural environment, and to learn and incorporate that into the restoration process. Because we're not just reconciling people, we're also reconciling creation. So we start by doing the desert experience for 5 days. After 5 days in the desert, we meet twice a month, once in person and once online. Of course, during the desert, we have camel rides and jeep rides as well. There are different activities that we do, and we learn from the Bedouin community that live in the desert day in and day out. And there's a lot of details that I can share about the process. But in essence, I want you to think of 3 milestones in the process. First is building relationships and some kind of trust to an extent, some kind of rapport between each other. The second is that people are asked in the process to think of their identity. So is your identity coming at the expense of your neighbor and enemy, or is it a source of blessing to your neighbor and enemy? So that's a key question that we ask. and people are asked to reclaim their identity. So, for example, the Israeli Jews, we ask them, what is Zionism to you? But what has been the experience of Palestinians with Zionism and the true moral test of Zionism and how it treats its neighbors and enemy? And then for Israeli Jews, for the Palestinians, sorry, we say, first of all, we'd like you to imagine a liberated Palestine. In your imagination of a liberated Palestine, where do the Israeli Jews fit in this liberation project? And you'll see that many times when Palestinians talk about liberation, at best they'll ignore Israeli Jews, or at worst will say that they have to go back to their homelands from Europe or wherever they came from. And what we're trying to say is that we need to be articulating and imagining a liberated Palestine in which relationships are restored. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of the relationship between reconciliation and liberation in a moment. We continue to meet. We go and visit the physical locations that we have obstacles that separate us and divide us and destroy our lives, such as the separation wall that and it's separating, obviously, as many of you know, Palestinians from Palestinians, not only Palestinians from Israelis, etc. We meet and eat a lot. A lot of our conversations surround around food. And again, this is our attempt to get out of the classroom, out of the hotel, into nature. And also in terms of the biblical background, Jesus also was with his disciples in the, olive groves, on top of a mountain, on a boat, on a lake, in the grass fields. And we are trying to look and to live that out as well. So we continue meeting, and then ultimately at the end process is that the group needs to take action, non-violent action against injustice. And this specific group, we continue to meet, and we, as you can see, we have a lot of fun together when we get together. They decided to do a Gaza booklet, which is available online, which they decided that their form of non-violence resistance was to take the voices of normal Gazans and to amplify them as much as possible. In addition to that, I'll show you, but there are three people, maybe I can mention their stories in the group. One of the guy that's right next to me in the picture on the right, who I have, I think, my hand around, he lost 50 members of his family in the genocide in Gaza. When he started the project, it was 28 family members. By the end of the project, he had lost 50, and he still decided to continue to show up. So that shaped the group, that shaped the project that people wanted to do. Another person in our group, he was a part of a violent resistance group, and he heard about our nonviolent resistance project, and that appealed to him. And that is, it's been a long story, but he has turned away from nonviolence, but he's super committed to the nonviolence projects, to the extent where he says, I'm willing to lay everything on the line for this. For me, this is not a joke. He's coming from a background of being imprisoned and shot multiple times as a resistance fighter. So you can see that there's that, and then the Israelis in our group, it's this this difficult relationship where we have an ex-resistance fighter, we have a guy who's lost all of his mother's side of the family basically in Gaza, and then we have Israelis in our group who are against the occupation and against what's happening in Gaza, but they have cousins, uncles that are involved in the military and present in Gaza. And one of the guys in our group, one of the Israelis in our team, he's actually the guy holding the baby in the picture. He was called to the military 7 times during the project, and he refused the call again and again and again because he said, I can't go to Gaza in this situation. At the time, his baby was not born. his wife was pregnant, and he was in danger of facing jail, prison, military prison, because of his refusal to go to Gaza. So you have this situation of a Gazan, and he's half Gaza, half Ramallah, and a guy who's called to the army, and a guy who was, and it's this really interesting, or I can say, cocktail of people who come together and say, well, we're going to do things different, and we want to do things different. So they decided to non-violently co-resist through storytelling, and taking the voices of the weakest and the silenced, and bringing them into circles of power, bringing them into different areas, and to fight against the narrative that the people in Gaza are just numbers. We always talk about 70,000, 75, 80,000, 140,000 people are getting killed. But who are these people? What are their names? What are their stories? So the goal of this booklet was to just amplify 10 stories from people in Gaza who are willing to share their, and not all of it is stories, some of it is they wrote poems, etc. And it's different people from different walks of life, and that for us was a concrete way that this group engaged in nonviolent co-resistance, and we avoided the danger of normalization, which would be, we went through the process, and then we just went back. The Palestinians went back to the refugee camps, and the Israelis to their beach houses, and it was a great experience. No, no, no. This group is still together, is still creating, is reaching out. They did this completely independently. They decided the only thing we did as an organization is that we reviewed all of the poems and stories to make sure that they're in line with our values as an organization, in order so that we can get behind it. One of the girls, a woman in our group was actually Rachel, who won the Oscar for No Other Land. You might have heard it won for the documentary, and she was in our group. And no way we are taking any kind of credit at all. We're just saying that these are the type of people that are involved in our work, who went and documented how the people of Musafir Yatta are being ethnically cleansed off of their land. And there's serious consequences also for doing this type of work. You're doing nonviolence with the acceptance that you are going to have to absorb and face violence in that. So the last thing I'd like to mention quickly, because I'm going way over time, I'm sorry, is just liberation and reconciliation is often presented as binary. It's or this or that. And I think that all movements that struggle and desire liberation, there is a danger for Palestinians that as we are struggling for liberation, that we can adopt in a way the, how do I say this, the characteristics, the forms of our oppressor when we're living under occupation, under dominance, under oppression for such a long time. Though when you start resisting it and fighting it back, there's a danger that you start fighting it back with its own language and with its own tools. That even as you imagine a life without this, you imagine yourself as the new master. So reconciliation asks us to dismantle all form of oppression, and it's offering a way to restore the humanity for both the oppressed and the oppressor. And I think that's something critical, and we could see that also Jesus, he reached out to the tax collectors, and he didn't give up on tax collectors, even though he was critical. So I think that we need to understand that for us as Palestinians in a reconciliation context, the Palestinian struggle for liberation and our commitment to humanity are inseparable from how we engage our Zionist adversaries. How we engage our enemy reflects who we are and what kind of God we believe in and what kind of reality we're trying to build. So committing ourselves to build a new model of humanity has to go beyond the native settler dichotomy, and it's imagining a new identity. It's imagining a new creation, as it's explained in the New Testament. And it's a creation, it's an identity that moves towards freedom away from oppression. And that's how you'll see many times it being articulated here. And I'll make the last argument, and I would say that from my experience, the Palestinians that often refuse to direct liberation towards reconciliation, and as a result may contribute to preserving the current violent model of humanity, I would say risk turning liberation itself into an idol. Why do I need liberation as a Palestinian? Why do I need freedom? I need liberation and freedom, A, because this is what I'm supposed to have as a human, but B, because it allows me to be in correct relationship with my neighbor. It allows me to restore the broken relationship. I cannot restore my broken relationship with my enemy and my neighbor if I don't have that freedom. So to understand freedom, to understand the Palestinians' struggle and desire for freedom is to understand our humanity. You cannot separate both. If you don't understand our need and desire for freedom, you still haven't understand our humanity as Palestinians. Last thing I'll say before we move to Q&A is just the cost is different. Reconciliation is costly and is going to ask of people different things depending on your position of power. So these are some costs that I wrote down, but there are more. The cost for the settler or people coming from positions of power is joining in solidarity movements for the oppressed. It's to unlearn the supremacist settler colonial identity and narrative. It's to sacrifice and use privileges to assist the native, redistribution of power, reparations for the historical injustices committed, right? 70% of the people living in Gaza are not originally from Gaza. They are people that were displaced in 1948 from the Nakba. It's a historical injustice that continues until this day. And the cost for the native is to engage with your oppressors and perpetrators. It's to embrace a nonviolent approach of resistance, to accept the presence of the settler and share with them indigenous ways, forgiveness, and refuse to embrace a victimization mentality. And I know that these are very controversial and upsetting. However, I will stand behind them and say that in a reconciliation process, these things are necessary, healthy, and can lead to new outcomes that are currently, it seems, totally off the table. So I don't know. I've never been to New Zealand, and I would love to go. I've met some very cool people, like Paul, who came here, spent with us a lot of time. We got to know him, and there have been other people from New Zealand that we've gotten to know over the time. And I know you are very far away geographically, but it almost feels like that the context offers some differences, but also many similarities. And that in order for the situation here to have any kind of significant positive trajectory, it cannot be only that the problem here is addressed and resolved. We're talking about a global ecosystem that has enabled war, that has enabled mass killing, that has enabled genocide. It also means, therefore, that it has to be a global movement to reconciliation. In order for the problem to be resolved here, it also needs to be resolved in the United States in particular, but also its allies and its other countries that follow similar models. I want to be careful not to, draw. I know that there are differences, many differences, even between New Zealand and Australia. But I'm obviously quite ignorant and I don't know. But the question remains: there's still going to be power dynamics. I'm sure in New Zealand there are going to be the settler native dichotomy is going to exist. So it's really how do we address these things? How do we restore broken relationships locally, but it has to be also, I believe, a global movement for it to really bring the fullness of what we call the kingdom of God, where people are in true, correct and harmonious relationship with one another. Cole, I'm so sorry I took too much time, but I'm happy to stay for as long as people want and to answer question.
Not at all, Daniel. That was incredible. Thank you. Really, really wonderful and important insights into your context. And like you say, I think they map very clearly and very convictingly, is that a word? Onto our context here. Granted, there are, big differences regarding what stage of settler colonialism we're at in Aotearoa versus in Palestine, but all the same systems. And I think hearing the stories of Israelis engaging in the work of Musalaha, for me, actually, like brings a lot of thoughts of, yeah, for me growing up in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a lot of the narratives that we had, the ideas that we had, or me, I say, as a Pākehā, as a non-Māori, growing up in New Zealand, and even defensiveness to engage with the lived reality and narratives of what Māori experienced and are experiencing. And so I think it is a really compelling invitation for us to engage in our context here. And looking at the role of the church in the settler colonialism of Palestine right from the very start through till today, I thought, again, if people have questions, chuck them in the chat. But I thought a question I want to ask to start off with, Daniel, is to you, what could reconciliation look like between Palestinian Christians and the global church? What does it look like for the global church to engage in reconciliation where we have been directly involved in fueling the systems of oppression and violence and genocide in Palestine? Oh, I need to unmute you again. My bad, bro. Where are we? I've lost you. There you go.
I'll make sure not to mute myself again. Thanks for the question, Cole. I think one of the ways, well, first of all, is to recognize what is exactly broken in our relationship. What is exactly broken in the relationship between the Palestinian Christians and other Christians that come from different places around the world? I think one of the part of the brokenness is just the lack of awareness that there is very active and I would say small, but a lot of energy in the Palestinian Christian church here. And I think that many times we just feel rejected or ignored by our Christian brothers and sisters from around the world. And it's in particularly frustrating when Christians come to visit the holy sites and sort of skip over their Christian family that's been existing and living here for years. And it's also it is also the Christians that have been the custodians of the holy sites that have, witnessing the gospel through these sites for all these years. So I think if there is a desire to travel, I would say to this area of the world. I know that you're very far away, but it's very possible. Is that when you come and spend time with us, come and get to know us. We're not always just asking for help. Sometimes we just want to spend time, to be with each other, and it's something that I could call for maybe people who come here from the West, is that you really need to understand maybe the ministry of presence. The idea that you're gonna come here and you're not going to be able to solve any of the major problems that we have. You are not the right necessarily people, and you don't have the capacity and the knowledge and all these things. But your ability to come and be present with us and be in solidarity with us and sit with us and laugh with us and eat with us and cry with us, these are things that actually strengthen and I think make us stronger. So I would highly encourage people to think of trips to the Holy Land also as a form of ministry of presence. There are people who are suffering, there are people who are under danger on a daily basis, and your ability to come and just be with us and what I would then call it is solidarity. So I think that's one way that we can start to restore the broken relationship that exists between Palestinian Christians and Christians in the West. Uh, Other ways is that I would say many times I meet Western Christians and they are interested in supporting Palestinians, but then they sort of ignore the indigenous population of their own lands. Usually I can know if somebody is their attitude towards Palestinian by their attitude towards the indigenous people of their own country and their own land. So I think that the restoration of relationship is really asking people to take responsibility over their circles of influence and power in their own communities as well. It will directly, I think, also contribute to what is happening here. Uh, and I think, we have I just saw also we have with us Sophie also. Good to see you, Sophie. It's been a long time, but examples of Sophie and Cole that have come here and spent time here is just really really fantastic, and that has led to many other possibilities, opportunities. I mean, look, I got introduced to Cole through Sophie, and then I met Cole in Bethlehem, and now we're having this webinar today. I mean, it's the relationship and connection that I think really really matters. So that's what I would encourage. There's a great organized company, Christian company in New Zealand that's been helping us with design for some of our projects. So it's led to so many different possibilities that has been really, really great.
Awesome. Yeah, I was meaning to give a shout out to Sophie there as well. It's pretty cool seeing actually like you say that chain of effect of how those connections can just lead to more connections and and you touched on the role of Christians visiting the Holy Land, and I think yeah, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the role that pilgrimage has played in sometimes very harmful ways, where Christians will visit the land and kind of almost in this very extractive way take their own, really emotional mountaintop experience and their faith from it, whilst ignoring the lived reality of Palestinians um, on the other side of the wall, or sometimes even on the same side of the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also a thing that makes a huge difference is evil thrives when good people are silent. And I would say, you standing up and saying something in your family dinner, in your workspaces, in your churches, wherever you are, makes a big difference because there's power. And whenever people are saying things that are dehumanizing towards other people and they go unchecked, it gives it a lot more power. So I would really encourage to speak up um, and I don't want to, I want to be careful not to explain to people like how I think this is something that people have to figure out for themselves. But principally speaking, uh, that's another thing that I think is important.
Mm. On that note as well, I'm aware we're drawing towards our closing time. So just before it, there's a couple of questions in the chat, but as regards to resources, I'm going to plug your brother's wonderful book that you've also contributed a beautiful chapter to, Daniel, that covers a lot of what you covered tonight. But if people are interested, The Cross and the Olive Tree, edited by John and Sam Munayer, and with contributions from a bunch of other awesome Palestinian theologians, including Daniel. We've actually got some copies of that for sale on our website at ac4pp.com if people want to get their hands on that. And before I forget as well, we also have coming up in July a speaking tour with the wonderful Dr. Lama Mansour and Dr. Yusuf Houri, who are from Nazareth and Bethlehem, respectively, respect respectively. They're from those cities, is what I'm trying to say, and they're coming here to New Zealand to share their lived experience, their theology, and to meet with Christian communities, with churches, with Bible colleges. So there's some information again on our website for the dates and venues for that at ac4pp.com/tour. So. Yeah, we're really excited for that. That means we won't be having a webinar next month. But Daniel, thanks so much for your time. There's a couple of questions here that people were asking about examples of co-resistance in the land, but I think you've covered some of those really effectively as regards to groups of the active co-resistance. Are there any other particular ones that you kind of want to highlight or that you think are a really good example of what co-resistance can look like?
Well, one very concrete is that one of our groups used to meet at a spring, which was in what we call Area C in the West Bank, which is the place where both Israelis and Palestinians can meet. The spaces that we can actually meet are shrinking drastically, and have already been shrunk. So it's very difficult. But one of the springs that we used to meet regularly and plan and discuss, and it was a part of our process this spring. They just built a checkpoint that pushed the border further in to Area C in the West Bank. So what happens is that the Israelis can now go to the spring and the Palestinians can no longer access it. So one of the spaces, the checkpoint, destroyed the ability for our group to continue meeting at the spring, the new location of the checkpoint. So what the group decided to do is to actually explain and document how they used to use the spring, how moving the checkpoint has destroyed the ability to meet there. But really what they're doing by creating these short videos, it's in the process, is they want to highlight the actual impact of this checkpoint on reconciliation and peace work. But then also the checkpoint is a symbol and is sort of the branch of a trunk and roots of that are far deeper and far more problematic. So it's really pointing that the checkpoint is really reflecting the disastrous impact of the occupation and of the settler colonial project as well. So they're working on that currently, which I think is really important because it's a way for them also to process the impact that this has had on them in a constructive and healthy way. So they're actually going to do something about it and create something instead of just complain and get depressed, which is what a lot of us do here because it's so difficult. So it's really helped gear energy into a constructive and great way, and the goal is to create awareness on how this is impacting, and not just the land, but also the ability to just reconcile and to develop a relationship. So that's another way that people have been non-violently coexisting. It depends also on the group because we have two tracks. We have the Israeli-Palestinian track and we have the intra-Palestinian track, which brings Palestinian Christian, Muslim, atheist, Jews. Everybody is welcome to join basically our projects. And we say that we are a Christian faith-based organization, but we are open and want to work with everyone who is interested. So I think that's a question many times I get asked. And also the Christians are like 1% of the population. So if we only worked with the Christians, we would be working with a very, very small group of people in this land. So we believe that our work should be a blessing to all.
Awesome. And it is as well. It's yeah, it's such important and wonderful work that you do, Daniel, and having been able to see some of it and volunteer in some of the Musalaha spaces. It's yeah, I just want to talk all that to support that and say if people are really keen to support the work of Musalaha, you can go to musalaha.org and find more information there. I saw someone was asking about the different stages of reconciliation. I believe that's also up on your website as well. Yeah, for more information about Musalaha and ways to give to support the work of Musalaha, really want to encourage people to do that. And yeah, Daniel, can we just pray for you and your work and the whole Musalaha community to finish, if that's cool? God, thank you for Daniel. Thank you for his important work and the entire community who drive Musalaha in this wonderful, compelling, and radically different pathway that challenges people to see humanity. God, we pray that you protect them and support them and just really move in that space, in a space that's so important. And God, move us as well to play our part as part of this interconnected global community to seek accountability, to seek justice, so that this reconciliation work on the ground really can make the impact, the full impact that it holds. God, we pray all of this in your name, and we thank you for the work of Daniel and Musalaha in your name. Amen.
Amen.